Welcome to another episode of the Consulting Psychologists Beyond the Session. I'm Dr. Marshall Bewley.
Dr. Carrie Lavelle.
Great to come to you on this Friday afternoon or Friday morning. I guess it's not afternoon yet.
Right. Well, depending on where you are, it might be 3 o'clock somewhere, right?
Yeah. Hopefully not on Monday. I mean, hopefully this is, you're not hearing this on a Monday, but hey, maybe that helps you get through your day better.
Right. It's like PSA. Do yourself and us a solid by listening to us at a time that you're needing a pick me up, but also if you need that on Monday, I'm glad to be somebody's high point. So
Yeah. Speaking of Mondays, um, there's this thing I heard once about like, it's really good to go into your week um, without putting too much on a Monday, which is kind of interesting because I tend to like my Mondays to be busier than other days of the week.
hmm
Just wonder kind of where you fall on that.
I have always been a Monday like a week front loader. And so Mondays being the busiest means that it's always downhill from Monday. And that I don't, so a big Monday, yeah, I feel good about, but I won't deny that I do connect with that Sunday scaries, Monday blues kind of thing sometimes. So, and I actually, the benefits of private practice, shout out beyond the session, is that we can make our own schedule. And so I do ease into a Monday, and it might be more administrative or meeting heavy versus session heavy. And so I think part of private practice for me has been about self care and work life balance, such that I enjoy my weekends so much that it's not that I don't like my job, it's that I just want the weekend to be longer and not end. So I think that's what it's more about for me, probably at this stage of my career. At different parts of my career, it was
Mm.
dread versus longing, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. Well, and I want to talk more about my particular Monday this week, but we're going to be
Sure.
talking about kind of attendance and cancellation policies and just how you manage that within your private practice. So um, that's kind of a preview for what the listener, what you're hearing today.
hmm
So, in terms of day by day, it's been a process, but my maximum number of clients that I'll see a day is six.
hmm
And rarely do I have where I'll put a seventh session. When I started, I would do eight, and now I'm like, what was I thinking? But this particular Monday, I had my Thursday client who needed to switch days due to work, and this is a one-time thing. This is not a pattern. So Monday worked, so we, you know, put our session for Monday, which may not have seven sessions going into Monday. And part of that Sunday dread was like, why did I do this to myself?
mm
Like, why don't I follow this, six maximum thing that I have my system set up at? But that's, I was trying to go uphill before I went downhill for this week.
hmm
So how the day played out is that I ended up actually having two cancellations. So ended up being a five session day, which I was great with. Um, so what was interesting though, this week I had a little bit more cancellations than I usually do. And I had one person where we were trying to kind of reschedule within the same week, and that worked out. And they canceled both sessions. They canceled both sessions outside of the 24-hour window that I require, but it put me kind of in this, bind in terms of wanting to respect, you know, their life circumstances, but also then the business side of like, we can't keep doing this canceling at the 25th hour.
Right.
So I wonder maybe we can talk a little bit about maybe we can just start off talking a little bit about what is our policies with cancellation and attendance.
Absolutely. I think this is such an important part of private practice and being a business owner and running that business efficiently. And that, I think we've talked about that in a previous episode, that beyond the session work that we do with our clients, it is about running a business. And sometimes those two things can feel, I don't know that they are, but they can certainly feel mutually exclusive. Being a business owner and being a mental health professional, a psychologist specifically. And what's interesting for me, is that hearing that this is a challenge for you, because I believe that I have gotten better at this for me because of consulting with you.
Mm.
And that's not shade, that's just hopefully a point of reflection that I hope that we can do together today, as people might relate to both sides of us. Um and so, well, let's just start with, why have a cancellation policy? What is your response to that?
It protects the therapeutic relationship.
Hmm.
It provides clear boundaries, a safe framework of therapy, and um, yeah, I think it just helps, add more consistency and predictability within the relationship.
Hmm. Absolutely. It's also about the business aspect of, when you're not meeting with that client as scheduled, you're not getting that income. And we have to balance that always. It's the privilege and the burden of private practice, is managing our income in a way that's sustainable. And so let's not forget, like, I think it maybe depends on the situation. It depends on the hat that you're wearing, on which one of those things might come first. It prevents from our clinical roles, from our psychologist hat. It is most certainly the um, boundaries, healthy modeling, honoring the agreement between me and a client. And then if I'm wearing my business person hat, it's definitely, how do I make sure that my schedule stays sustainable, so that I don't overpack it to account for too much attrition, and that then when everybody shows, I'm kind of a puddle on the floor come Friday, right?
Hmm.
So definitely very important.
Yeah. Um, yeah. I wonder, how do you talk to your clients about cancellation policy? Like, when does that conversation occur?
That is such a good question, because as um, as I try to be really thorough in my practice policies when onboarding a client, to outline everything about missed appointments and late cancellation fees and that kind of thing, so that folks aren't surprised. But if we're being really honest, and if we've ever been a client before, we know that we're probably entering services not at our peak performance, or our best cognitive mindset. And so I believe that we do have an ethical imperative to the client, but also to ourselves, to ensure that we review certain parts of our practice policies in that first session, to ensure that we're setting up for a good fit, or having conversations about things that may come up that may impair that therapeutic rapport. And so in the first session, it is essential for me to say, the other thing that I want to talk about is my practice policies, which I'm sure you read with a fine tooth comb when you were going through all that paperwork.
Mhm.
In there, you may have seen a missed appointment section. And I wanted to talk about that and have a really open conversation about what that means, and how that protects you, how that protects me, and how that sets us up for some clear expectations looking ahead. And I'll talk about, one of the things that I want you to know is that when you schedule an appointment with me, I am going to be present with you for that session. And that's important for me. That's the service that I think you deserve and have the right to expect from me. In the same vein, if you cancel last minute, that means that that time can't be given to anybody else, because I've already reserved it in calendar and in headspace for you. So that's where those appointment fees come into play. And I kind of think about it kind of like a concert or an event that you buy a ticket to. If you buy a ticket and can't go for whatever reason, you may try to resell that ticket, but you may not always be able to. And so that means that you might be out the cost of that ticket. And that's kind of this too. You are reserving a ticket for my calendar. And if you aren't able to make it, that's okay. but there may be there will be a fee incurred with that, or the price of that ticket or a part of it will be still owed. And how does that sit with you? What are your reactions to that? What questions do you have about that? How can, I don't want that to be an impediment. I want it to be a clarity.
Yeah, that's great. Well, I think I model a similar process that I hear you describing, and I like your approach to it because I think sometimes, you know, in that first appointment, the client's just kind of ready to get to talking and they don't want to talk about that yet. But it's
Right.
such an important part of establishing that boundary that later
Mhm.
on is going to be important with this. And I think one thing that I add that I'm sure you add too is that, especially with um, us being managed care providers, talking about like, hey, when there's a cancellation policy that occurs, your insurance is not going to cover that, by the way. So that full price or that half price is going to be your responsibility, which is a big difference than your copay price.
Really good, really good point. That's part of, I think it's about fully informed consent. And of course, it may go without saying, but I'm going to say it anyway, that this is after I've reviewed the core parts of the informed consent and confidentiality process that we are, I'm pretty sure it's an ethical imperative as well, that we review both in written form and verbally. So I review that and then review this piece. And so I definitely want to think about how to integrate that in, just so that if they didn't notice what those fees are, that we talk about it. And I even have in my intake form, we reviewed this piece. So I think that informed consent, that ensuring that everybody's on the same page, is just such an important part of setting forth in a therapeutic process that is mutually safe.
Yeah. Uh, I want to talk about, one thing that comes to mind for me that I've thought about with attendance is I first have to shout out Christy Vera, who's a social worker that taught me this kind of process when I was on internship in Virginia. Um, and she always talked about keeping the frame. And and she was a big group therapy guru. So she would
Mhm.
talk about group starts on time and it ends on time, and keeping that frame provides a sense of safety, stability for clients so they can know when the session's starting and when it's ending. And I really like that approach just in general of how you as a therapist keep the frame with your clients in a consistent way, because I think with attendance and cancellation policies, where my biggest struggle with it is when I have a client who I know, I hear their life context and I hear how they're going paycheck to paycheck, and maybe sometimes the copay is a struggle to be paid. Where I have another client who maybe finances aren't even a concern, and if they cancel, full charge, no issue. Sometimes the personal side of feeling and maybe projecting onto the client that's financially insecure maybe makes me want to like keep the frame less, maybe give them an extension, or give them another free pass. And I think that that's something that I just want to talk out, like that struggle, and if that's a felt struggle for you or what your reaction is.
Such a good thing, such a good topic to bring into consult about, because those things beyond the session are what can really riddle us as private practice business owners the most. And I want to highlight that your willingness to identify a sense of projecting a certain mindset or idea about what that might mean to them is by definition what countertransference is. And we get introduced to that as a concept in graduate school, but it's a theory until it isn't. And this is exactly it. What might I be projecting onto them based on my own experiences with financial insecurity, or my biases, or explicit or implicit around financial status, or maybe I'm particularly financially stressed in my personal life or business life, and that feels threatening to me in a way that I can't put into words until I consult about it. So I appreciate this conversation so much. And I think that it needs to be modeled for folks who are looking into private practice or already in it, and how are they managing this? And so one of the things that maybe you and I have talked about at a different part in this of our experiences in private practice is the way that we may give a pass, or like, hey, this would fall under the missed appointment fee. The next time it's going to count. It's almost like a warning, which I don't think is wrong or bad. I also have come to appreciate, the longer that I've been in practice, the more clients I've had, the fuller my caseload is that becomes harder to track. And so thanks to you and what sounds like Miss Vera's coaching way long ago, I actually have moved away from that. It doesn't always feel easy sometimes, but it does feel like less for me to maintain. And then going back to something that I also heard you say that I also have done in the past, but have moved away from, is that if you can reschedule in the same week, then if you need to cancel late, but you can reschedule in the same week, then the fee doesn't apply. I don't think that it's good, bad, right, wrong. I think that what for me has come up is that it becomes a lot to manage. And then I feel a sense of pressure to avoid them having a fee incur to make room for them later in my week. Or if it's Thursday, for, really pushing them into a Friday or something that just doesn't work for me. And so in practice and recognizing the way that transference comes up for me as a clinician, and feeling frustrated with somebody that they may be seeming to be inconsistently engaged in the therapy process, or the projection of not feeling like my time is respected, which I know is most often not the case, or that I feel compelled to take it easy on somebody, that can feel unfair for other people with whom I might not do that for reasons of context that I have. And so one of the things that I've learned from you along the way is making it flat, and just a informed, but also not putting more work on me to track and manage, has really been relieving. And so I hope to be the you to you that you have been for me, for years, around this. And I just went on a long rant. So let me stop and check in with you about what you're hearing and how that's landing.
Yeah, no, that's great. I think, what I was sitting with thinking is like, even in my policies, taking out like, cancellations apply and except out of emergencies or you know, sick cancellation, or, if you're physically ill. I think just taking out the exceptions and, having a conversation potentially about like, if life circumstances happen, we can talk about how those circumstances are impacting your treatment, versus we can talk about whether the fee applies or not. Because I think becomes subjective, and I go back to like, well, why do we have the policy? We don't have the policy to justify what's a valid excuse or a valid reason versus not. We have the policy to maintain that boundary, to maintain our business, to, and I think cancellations are a clinical issue, if it's even the sense of like how quickly they canceled, or, like the interpersonal side of the cancellation. When somebody cancels, does it lead to a lot of um, chaos in a sense, or are you unable to process it with the person? Sometimes I have people that cancel, I'll see you in 2 weeks, and maybe two times in a row. It's like, well, let's have a conversation about that, versus it's become this thing that we don't talk about.
Absolutely. It's the modeling aspect of how are we colluding with their avoidance or their discomfort, or it's a shared avoidance and discomfort, and how are we reinforcing that versus modeling, approaching uncomfortable conversations. And I do believe that we have a responsibility as the inherent authority in the room, not authority over, but that inherent power differential, just to to clarify that, I believe it's our responsibility to bring up those conversations to model for the client how they might be able to do that around other things in their personal life, whether it's about finances, missed appointments, um, fees and charging, um, or anything of that sort, the way that they may need to have hard conversations at home regarding finances, disciplining of children, future planning, etc. So if we aren't doing that, then how are we implicitly reinforcing that it's okay that they don't do that in their personal life? I think it's all a parallel process.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's good too because you might I was gonna say you might have favorites or you might be biased towards, you know, not being consistent with your policy based off how connected you are to somebody or what their context is and what we, maybe subjectively put onto that or deem, this is worthy or not worthy to cancel a session for. So
Yeah.
I
That
just go
that
back to
feels like an uncomfortable and maybe an unnecessary way to be the decider of, does this cancellation warrant, is this cancellation worthy of not being billed? And that feels like an inappropriate power place versus this is the policy and it's going to be implemented and we can discuss it, but it doesn't mean anything may change.
yeah. So here's another layer of it. I wonder, um, how do you think gender, race, cultural variables kind of impact the the implementation of this?
I think that it's multifaceted. I think that the gender of the clinician and the gender of the client are going to have an interaction effect one way or another. As a woman, I find it easier to hold this policy with men personally, in large part because I am primed to claim my space as a woman with men differently than I am with women, right? I think that in our society, peer to peer, we are differently supported and coached in holding our space with other men in whatever capacity. And so that feels actually ironically easier than it feels to hold with other women who I might have a different kind of lived experience connection with. And from the client perspective, who may expect maybe special treatment based on the depth or longevity of the relationship. And I think that men are socialized to understand rules differently as black and white, and women are socialized to see nuance and variance. And that's where sometimes some clash can happen for me. That's what I've experienced so far, is that most men are less, push back less on those boundaries when they're applied than some of the women that I have applied those boundaries with.
Yeah. No, that's great. And I know that we've also had previous conversations around, you know, just us talking, as friends and colleagues about like how much pushback do we get around cancellation policies. And I referenced like I've never gotten pushback. So I also think that the therapist variables here make this conversation easier in terms of just dynamically my own
Mhm.
money experiences get in the way internally, but externally I think as a white man, I'm going to be challenged less, where women therapists or therapists of color might have different struggles in terms of being challenged differently.
Mhm. Absolutely. I think that definitely plays a role. It is probably the single part of private practice that I think about, talk about, and feel like I spend the most time on deciding, or talking myself through. Um, I don't think that that's unique to me. I think that that's probably a fair part of this. And, I think about for folks who may be tuning into this podcast and really wanting to understand those, beyond the session concepts, is that group where people are anonymously writing to other people, and there's so much, whether it's intentional or not, I can't be sure, but there might be shaming or judgment portrayed, and text is hard because you don't get that tone that you can discern where somebody's coming from. But I know that some people are often like, I don't have a policy at all. I, if people are sick or this or that, I expect the same kind of understanding in return and this and that. And I want to give space that there are multiple ways to do this. For me, based on my life context, based on my health and ability status, based on how I operate in the world as a psychologist who does tend to lean more to a very traditional behavioral and cognitive approach and theoretical methodology, I have the ability to be very consistent. Knock on wood, I'm very thankful for that at this time in my life. And that's something that I feel I offer in my own individual clinician toolboxes, a more traditional behavioral steadiness. Not that other people don't are bad, or that that's not steady in a different way. And so I think this also comes back down to fit. If people are looking for somebody who's going to be there, I'm gonna be there. And thankfully, again, health and ability status matter here for me. And so, and when I am unwell, I usually have an indicator in advance, and I try to practice all the things that we teach people about mindfulness and recognizing. And have there been human moments? 100%, don't get it twisted. But most of the time, I am able to sell this thing. And that also, as I'm talking about it out loud with you, actually, I'm able to reinforce that that means that a client who's differently able to engage that approach is going to be the best fit for me, which is why talking about that is so important in a rapport building process. And in the same way that sometimes people are seeking somebody who might represent chronic illness differently in parallel to them, or who might not have policies for cancellation or missed appointments because there's a shared experience of something that just may be unpredictable. And I respect the hell out of that. That doesn't have to be me, and I don't have to be wrong not doing that, though. And I think that's one of the biggest things that I hope people can gain from this conversation is determining where you are on that and what you need and what you're able to give. And that's how your policy should be set.
Yeah, I love that. And um, gosh, I'm gonna bring in some research just to kind of, ground us in that. But there was a systematic review in 2023 that found that therapists who maintain emotional boundaries, so think about your sense of self, recognizing your own capacity for that Monday or that week, not personalizing every client's distress, are less likely to experience burnout. Boundaries are poor, therapists tend to become over involved, carry clients' emotions outside of session, getting overwhelmed, that spillover, that getting caught up in that storm can occur.
I can only snap with one hand, but yes, right? Like that's actually affirming for me and validating and excellent things to point out to folks who might be newer in this process. But when we have our own human moments where things feel more stressful, we might be caught up in a cycle of overthinking or imposter syndrome in our own world, that really firm policies built on rationale and intentionality are things we can lean into whenever we're in those zones of life. And that keeps us showing up for our clients in a way that is steady, even if we might feel a little unsteady, like a duck on water. They may not see our feet, but leaning into our policies keeps us from sinking into the water. And that's how I see it, right? And that Um, I notice that whenever I go through my own phases of just being a human, that it leaning into policies that I've been so intentional on creating helps me not add that to a plate of internal humanness that I may already be going through, and use that as a system, use that's your foundation. And outside of the session in that way, these are the things that are really important to consult with yourself intrapersonally and then also with colleagues interpersonally about some of the ways that people navigate these things.
Yeah. Mm. Well, and just to go back to something you said earlier in this session or this episode, it's you talk to your clients about how you're gonna show up and you're gonna be
Mhm.
focused in that hour for them. And I just think like, gosh, it feels like this whole conversation's about helping the client also feel safer and understand what's going to happen in this relationship. You're taking their work seriously.
And it can feel so heart-wrenching, but also the thing that keeps me in this gig is that, and I think a lot of us can relate to this, is that we may be the healthiest relationship that somebody has in their life to date. And if we are not modeling for that for them, how are they going to know when it exists or doesn't with somebody else?
Mm.
And that to me is the deeper healing and change process of therapy, right? It's
Yeah.
beyond symptom remediation or improving coping skills. It's getting a mental map of being able to not like something, being charged a missed appointment fee, for example, but understanding why and respecting that. And how does that translate directly to they're in a new dating relationship and somebody set a boundary with them, and that doesn't mean that there is not care or interest to maintain the relationship. Rather, I don't prefer this boundary, but I get it and I respect it. That it is directly parallel, in my opinion. And
Mhm.
I believe that is, I'm going to say great responsibility, but I'm also going to say grave responsibility. That maybe that's a little hyperbolic in this Friday morning chat, but I do think that that is, I take those things seriously in the way that I practice because, again, that comes back to that behaviorism, modeling, cognitive neuroplasticity development. And that's fundamentally tied to the underpinnings of my clinical practice. Other people may practice differently. Feminist models may see it differently and operate differently, and that is okay. I respect that. This is just the way I do it.
Yeah. I wonder, do you have a conversation with clients when you charge the cancellation or no show fee or
So I do not. It's in the practice policies. I have an early conversation, and then what I will say if somebody reaches out via email or portal message about needing to cancel and it's technically a late cancel, I say thank you for letting me know about your need to late cancel. Feel free to use the portal, or otherwise I'll see you at your next regularly scheduled appointment. And so there's an acknowledgement and a labeling of it as such. Um, and but other than that, I may check in. Sometimes people say, "Oh, I'm so sorry for having to late cancel that last week," and that actually came up yesterday. And I said, "No worries. Thank you for respecting the missed appointment policy, and know that there's no apology necessary. You had to do what you needed to do in your life, and that just meant that this was the outcome. And I appreciate us being able to respect both sides of that."
yeah, great.
So I don't preemptively have a conversation about it, but it may come up.
Yeah. I think that's, it's clinically indicated if it comes up, but we don't also need to assume that the client's coming in and they're needing to talk about it.
Exactly.
Um,
They may respect it more than we realize. That's our countertransference probably coming up to project onto them.
yeah.
Nod, nod, wink, wink, right?
Well, we just don't get trained in this area of our field, and money is like you know, this thing that I know in grad school we definitely didn't talk about and
Hmm.
didn't get to have conversation about. So I think it does just inherently challenge our professional role and what we do with people, but it's separate. And I forget where I heard this, and maybe I don't want to give the wrong person credit, but um, the therapy relationship is always a financial relationship as well. And I think just
Yes.
remembering that if there is I mean, not all the time, but this is a financial relationship. And part of this financial agreement is what helps both of us have clear boundaries and maintain this professional financial relationship.
Yes. I don't know. That may not have been from me. I think I got something like that from you in a really difficult consultation that you and I had over the course of several weeks last year. And I will say it like this, and it has continued to stick with me. I believe that all relationships are transactional. The relationships we may have with our family members mean that the transaction is related to some family expectations, so some reciprocal or mutual family expectations. With, with a friend, it may be that we're going to giggle our tails off, and that is our currency. And with our partner, it may be that safety, trust, love, affection is the currency, and that we are transacting often. And it's not tit for tat, which can feel hard. It's maybe like a bank account or a savings account and it kind of ebbs and flows, right? And so, you support me in this way, friend, partner, whoever, and the to the count is that that you're going to get that from me later. And that intimacy is currency. And so in therapy, it's a transaction too. What you get from me as your therapist, expertise, validation, appropriate and therapeutic confrontation and challenge, perspective, insight.
Great metaphors.
Thanks. What you're going to get from me in that is the currency that you're getting from me, and the currency I'm getting from you for that, the reciprocal currency is the payment. And that is not dirty. That's not ugly. That's not wrong. But if we can really get rooted in that, I think it can help us feel more grounded in ourselves as a business. And I come back to that a lot because I think at face value, people are like, transactions are bad. No, it is a reciprocal transaction. It's just that the currency may be different in what we are paying each other. And I don't know. We'll see in the comments of this consulting psychologist episode about, what other people think about it. For me, at this phase in my career, it has been very grounding. And so I hope that it also normalizes that all relationships are transactional. The currency just may be different. And if they're transactional and not reciprocal, that may be indicative of an unhealthy relationship,
Mm.
or at least it's one part of it. So, um,
Yeah, I love that. I wonder, for the people listening, just kind of what questions come up for them if you're in the field or if you're a client or you're both, just kind
mhm.
of your experiences with this particular struggle, or if it's a really area of success, just how it works for you. But
Can I share one more caveat before we wind down?
please.
I remember, don't get it twisted, public world. I am both a psychologist and a client. And I remember the first time I was ever charged a no-show fee. And I no-showed an agreed upon phone call that was scheduled. And see what had happened was that I forgot about it, made plans, and when I got the call, I was like, "Oops." And then shortly after, I don't remember exactly if I received a notification or I just saw it on my credit card statement, that fee. And I remember first going, "Ah," and then I was like, I straight up didn't answer that call. And I know how that feels when that happens, whether it's someone doesn't show to their appointment or doesn't, answer the call or whatever. And I was actually really grateful that that boundary was held because I have valued my therapist's time and my time. It just reinforced the way I value it and communicate. And that coming up in this moment feels like an important reminder for me and my clients that they may feel the exact same way, maybe a little bit perturbed by it, But then because of our rapport and our trust and our safety, it's like, yeah, I no showed, or I, X, Y, and Z, and this is just the natural outcome of that I am not surprised by.
I hope that brunch was worth it.
I actually, it was brunch, and I remember exactly where. It was a very vivid memory. It was like a core memory that maybe you never know what's going to be a core teaching moment until it's past. And I've thought about that before now, but talking about it out loud for me.
Yeah. Well, this has been great and lovely. And speaking of transactions, our time is up today. And we're going to keep the frame and trust this process. But yeah, it's been really good, and I hope it's been helpful for those listening today.
Well, and I hope that it's been helpful for you as you reflect on your Monday and make sense of your own experience and just continue to hone and refine that business mindset.
Yeah, thank you. All right, until next time.
Cheers.
See ya.
Bye.